Hey there, I'm Ryan Boehme, and you're tuning into So You Want to Teach Percussion. This video series is designed particularly for my current Percussion Methods students. Since they aren't able to have a typical Percussion Methods experience due to the current global pandemic, these videos are designed to give them a foundation of the technique outside of class time so that we have more time to play when we're together. But I also hope this video series can be helpful to any music educators out there. In this video, we're going to continue talking about fundamental technique. If you haven't seen the first video, click this rubber unicorn duck to check it out. In that video, you'll learn all about body carriage, grip, and first steps for playing. Now that we know how to hold the sticks and we're making some sounds, we need to know how to make specific sounds. I'm going to show you 4 stroke types, and then I'm going to show you some sticking options to apply to any music you're playing. If you don't know what any of that means,
keep watching.
If you just showed your students part 1, they'll know all the right steps for hitting a drum, but it's probably going to sound something like that. Works for some situations, like getting on everybody's nerves, and actually that's pretty much it. Just like playing any instrument, you want to practice playing with dynamics, phrasing, contrast, and all those other words your lesson teacher tells you to do during your private lessons. I'm going to teach you the 4 standard stroke types: the full stroke, downstroke, tap stroke, and upstroke. The whole point of these stroke types is to determine where our stick needs to be before we play a note and where it needs to be after we play a note. I'll show you what I mean with this example. On beat 1, we have an accented note followed by another accented note. Knowing that, I know that my stick needs to be at an accent level before I play the note, and furthermore, I know it needs to be at an accent level after I play the note, since the next note is an accent. To achieve this, we're going to use a stroke type that you already know: the full stroke. A full stroke starts high and ends high. That means before we play, I'm going to need to bend my wrist upward from playing position. After I make contact with the instrument, I'm going to allow the stick to rebound fully. Ideally, it's going to rebound back to its starting position. If your stick isn't rebounding back to the starting position, make sure your fulcrum is in the proper spot and that your back fingers are relaxed and not inhibiting any vibration of the stick. We covered this in part 1, but it bears repeating. Awesome. Now let's look at the next note. It's an accented note, so we're going to want our stick at an accent level before we play the note. But the third note here is an unaccented note. That means that the stick needs to be at a lower position after playing the second note so that we're prepared for the third note. If we use a full stroke here, we're going to have to adjust our height after the rebound, and we don't want to do that. So we're going to use a downstroke. A downstroke starts high and ends low. The first part of the downstroke is the same as the first part of the full stroke. We're going to bend our wrist upward and play the note. After the note, however, we're actually going to close the back fingers on the stick, bringing the stick in contact with the palm and intentionally stopping the stick from rebounding any higher. You don't want to close the back fingers before the note, as this will affect the natural vibration of the stick and, therefore, the sound that you're making. It may not be as noticeable on a practice pad, but it'll be really obvious on acoustic instruments. We want downstrokes to sound like full strokes, even though we're physically doing something different after the note. I heard a previous Percussion Methods student describe downstrokes this way: drop it and stop it. I really like this explanation because, well, it rhymes, and because it reminds you that you're not doing anything to the stick until after you play the note. The one thing to remember after stopping the stick is that you're going to have to open these back fingers up again so you can be as relaxed as possible for whatever the next note's going to be. 2 strokes down, 2 to go. Looking at our third note now, we have an unaccented note, which we're going to want to approach from a low level. And what do you know? The following note is also unaccented. So after we play that third note, we're still going to want the stick at this low level. That means we're going to use a tap stroke. A tap stroke starts low and ends low. I personally like to call these full stroke juniors. It's the exact same idea as a full stroke, but at a low height. You're allowing the stick to rebound, and it's rebounding back to its starting height. Just be careful that you don't get into a habit of squeezing the stick while you're playing tap strokes. Like I talked about in part 1, think of just bouncing a ball. If you're bouncing a ball at a low height, you're still only doing half the work. You're throwing the ball down, and the ground sends the ball right back up. But if you try to bounce the ball at a low height and you're holding onto the ball the whole time, it kind of looks like this. That just doesn't work, and you're probably not going to get picked for any basketball teams. And believe me, I know a thing or two about not being picked for basketball teams. Now we're looking at note number 4. It's not accented, so we should approach it from a low level, but the next note is accented, so we need to be at the accent level after we play the note. So we're going to need one more stroke type, the upstroke. An upstroke starts low and ends high. The first part of the stroke is identical to the first part of a tap stroke, but after your stick rebounds, you're going to assist the rebound by bending your wrist upward. So the note should sound like a tap stroke still, but now you're in position to play the accented note coming up next. I've been teaching percussion for like 83 years now, and I find that the upstroke is the most neglected of all the stroke types. For a lot of students I've taught, I'll see them play a tap stroke, then raise the stick. It's similar to an upstroke, but it actually involves two components: the tap stroke and then the lift. An upstroke is going to be more efficient for you because you're bending the wrist and raising the stick with the rebound. If you watch your students close enough, you might see them doing the same thing. Just remind them, hashtag upstroke lives matter. Nailed it. Now since the second half of the measure is the same as the first half of the measure, we can just copy paste all those stroke types. Now we have a really basic exercise that we can use to practice our stroke types in succession. If you're doing this for the first time, start by practicing it with one hand at a time, way slower than you think you need to, and get in front of a mirror if you can. For this exercise, you want to make sure all your high levels are consistent and all your
Low levels are consistent.
It's easy to kind of blend all the stroke types together at first, which ends up with your stick having a bunch of different high points and a bunch of different
Low points.
Practicing slowly from the get-go is going to help prevent this from happening to you. Once you start to get the hang of that with each hand separately, try incorporating both hands together. You might try them at the same time, which we call double stops. Shout out to the string players out there. You can also try going back to back between the hands. Again, go slow to go pro. Your brain might start to feel like it's short-circuiting when you try either of these exercises, but keep practicing and you'll figure it out. So that's all the stroke types you need to know right now. Full, down, tap, up. These are going to apply to every percussion instrument you play, and it's going to start you on a path to sounding more musical. Now we're going to talk about sticking options. Sometimes you're going to see percussion music that has stickings written in under the notes. R for right hand, L for left hand, sometimes B for both hands. But maybe that sticking isn't working for your student. On the flip side, maybe the composer doesn't specify a sticking, and then your student comes up to you like,
Hey, teach. Help.
To set you and your students up for success, there's two primary sticking methods you need to know: natural sticking and alternating sticking. With natural sticking, you're keeping your right hand on all the downbeats and upbeats, and you're keeping your left hand on all the E's and the U's. This can really help your students who are sight reading snare drum parts. As long as they're familiar with the different combinations of 8th note and 16th note rhythms, they can focus on the music and not have to worry about which sticking to use. I'll apply natural sticking to this basic 16th note timing exercise. One E and becomes right left right. One and a becomes right right left. One E becomes right left left, and then E and a becomes left right left. If you watch closely, you'll notice that when I'm playing each of these rhythms, one hand is playing legato strokes while the other hand is playing a downstroke. Because of this, you have to watch that downstroking hand carefully. It's easy to play louder with that hand just because there's more time to wind up for that note. Make sure the height of that stick doesn't exceed the height of your legato stick. The other sticking method is called alternating sticking. This is exactly what it sounds like. After you play a note with your right hand, next note's going to be on your left hand, then your right, then your left, whatever the rhythmic context is. Some players do have a tougher time using the sticking method without thinking about it, but that's something that's pretty easily overcome with a little bit of practice. So let's try the same 16th note timing exercise with alternating sticking now. When we get to each of the 8th and 16th rhythms, we're not repeating the right hand or left hand anymore. You'll notice in those measures that the first note of each of those groups is played with a right hand, then a left hand, and so on. You might also notice that all my strokes now are legato. That means that it's theoretically going to be easier to make each hand sound the same, since neither stick has a lot of extra downtime for prepping the next note. However, players who are new to alternating sticking may find that their timing suffers. That's because the rhythm for each hand is kind of irregular, unlike that predictability you had with natural sticking. Be sure to practice with a metronome or play along to some music to check your rhythmic accuracy. So there are some pros and cons for each sticking method, but in general, you want your students to be familiar with both methods to the point where they can mix and match them, playing one beat with natural sticking, one beat with alternating sticking, etc. It matters on snare drum, but it especially matters when we get to keyboards and timpani and drum set. So now you know a lot more about the finer details that are going on behind your playing. You know how to determine which stroke type is best for every single note you play, and you know how to come up with a sticking method for any musical passage. And with that, now you have a ton of fundamental ideas to apply to all the instruments we're going to be covering. As we work our way through each instrument, you're always going to want to go right back to those basics, honing in on body carriage, grip, general playing technique, and any musical decisions that need to be made. That's all for now. I'm Ryan Boehme, and thanks again for tuning into So You Want to Teach Percussion.